Christina, I'm the one to say thank you to you and to Liz for this fantastic fireside chat. We continue our discussion today, moving next and talking about building a resilient tech world by redefining cybertech. Well, obviously, cybersecurity is key. Yesterday, we had the opportunity to listen to our Cybertech panel when we were discussing the trust and collaboration and cooperation for a safer world. Today, Ryan Broderick, who is coming back to our stage, will bring us to another fascinating discussion with Kabir, Barday, who is founder and president and CEO of OneTrust, and our president and chairwoman of the Cybertech committee at Webit Global, Natalia Oropeza, chief cybersecurity officer and chief diversity officer at Siemens. But actually, Ryan will introduce the panel again. Ryan, welcome back. Thanks for joining.
Hello there. My name is Ryan Broderick. I'm a tech writer. I publish a newsletter called Garbage Day. And I have two very, very nice guests today. We have Kabir Barday, the founder and president and CEO of OneTrust, and Natalia Oropeza, the chief cybersecurity officer and chief diversity officer for Siemens. And we're talking about how to build a resilient tech world by redefining cybertech. Now, that's obviously a lot of jargon right at the beginning, but I think this is going to be a really fun conversation. And I want to start with, I guess, addressing the elephant in the room, the global catastrophe, I guess. So to kick things off, this question for both of you is, how do you feel the pandemic has changed how we think about cybersecurity? Obviously, a lot more people are working from home. There are probably less things in the way of cyber threats. I think a lot of people are sort of facing these on their own now. So I guess, what do you think about this? How has the pandemic changed things?
Natalia, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thank you, Kabir. And I will say a couple of ways that the COVID pandemic was kind of changing the world for us cybersecurity people. One of them is that the topic COVID was speeding up digitalization, and with that, of course, it speed up the use of software solutions, of cloud solutions, especially in the OT environment, meaning the factories. And therefore that increases the attack surface, and that speed up as well the need of cybersecurity solutions in order to protect these OT environments. This was one. So speed up the use as well of cloud solutions, just like the one we're using today to make this to make this panel. And third, of course, pushes a lot of people like me. In total, 250,000 people in Siemens, they went home and worked remotely. So this was changing the IT and infrastructure landscape, right? That we had used to have in the past, in the way that we used to protect companies. So actually, we needed to adapt very quick the protection that was provided to Siemens. So those are the ways that COVID was changing our lives. So Kabir, for sure you have more than that.
Natalia, I think you articulated it very well. I mean, like you said, the attack surface changed with cloud remote work and this massive digital transformation. The only two things I'd add are, number one, as companies went through this rapid digital transformation, and even to some extent, it wasn't just digital transformation, it was business model transformation and how services were provided in this new remote work and digital and e-commerce environment. Companies learned that in order to facilitate the agility in that cloud adoption and that remote work and that digital transformation, that security and privacy kind of moved from being this, like from an executive perspective, thought of as like a cost of doing business, to actually being the most fundamental business enabler in that change. Companies who invested in not security after the fact, but security by design up front, ended up finding that they were more resilient in the economic downturn. They were more agile in the business transformation, and they're going to outperform over time because they can move faster in all of these initiatives. It takes time as an organization to build the muscle to do these things right and fast and thorough. And the only second thing I would add is that the focus on an organization of cybersecurity also broadened. I mean, a lot of companies have had cybersecurity as a topic in the boardroom for quite some time. What the pandemic broadened the conversation of cybersecurity, but also think about third-party risk, supply chain resilience, business continuity, ESG and environmental impacts, social implications because of all the social unrest throughout the pandemic. And now companies are starting to think about what we're hearing companies call trust, which cybersecurity is one of many parts. And I think that's kind of the only addition I'd have to Natalia's answer is this whole conversation is just broadened to become so much more strategic rather than kind of an afterthought.
That's actually an excellent segue into my next question, which is, it feels like everything in life has completely destabilized since the pandemic, but I think that is doubly, triply, quadruply possibly so for the internet, whether we're talking about misinformation or we're talking about new cybersecurity threats. So I guess another big question for the two of you is, how do we help consumers understand who is a good actor online and who is a bad actor? And how do we navigate the incredibly foggy world of online trust? What are the first steps that we can start taking to fix things?
A couple of comments from my side, Kabir, if I may.
Please.
Couple of comments that word trust is very important to emphasize, because we do want the society to use the digital world, and we do want the society to use this digital world faster than ever, because that's the only way we will deal with the problems of the world, one of them global warming. There's no way that we can deal with that without digitalization. Now, the best way to enable that speed of use of the digital solution is to enable that use with trust. And how do you enable that trust in that technology? Well, you enable that trust in the technology by making the technology more secure or more cyber secure. And that needs an investment to be done in cybersecurity. And I agree with Kabir that the conversations have changed from cybersecurity being a cost to be a strategic investment for companies to enable the trust of their customers to use those kind of digital solutions. And this is actually the way that you can enable this difference between the bad and the good guys. You need to invest as companies and as individuals as well in cybersecurity. And Kabir, you probably can take it from there.
Yeah, Natalia, I obviously love the theme of trust, and I think you nailed it. And you know, the first challenge companies have, and Natalia mentioned it, I mean, cybersecurity is foundational to trust and identifying who's good in trust and who's not trusted. But companies are facing a more nuanced issue now, and depending on the business model of an enterprise, it really comes down to what a lot of companies are calling now a materiality assessment. They have to figure out for themselves what are the important topics to their customers and constituents when it comes to trust. So for example, cybersecurity is foundational pretty much everywhere. But then if you're a social media company, privacy is also part of that trust. If you're a company that produces a lot of greenhouse gas emissions and a physical impact, sustainability is part of that. And so there are other areas companies are trying to figure out what is authentic to them, what is an important way of scoping this concept of trust. Because when you pivot from thinking about cybersecurity to trust, that conversation broadens and all of that starts to become important. And then that trust concept needs to be embedded into an organization's marketing strategy. They need to invest in certifications from third parties that are accredited, that you can actually go and validate. back to the question on how do you differentiate a good guy from a bad guy? This is where the third-party certification marketplace that can be validated, and there's cybersecurity certs like ISO 27001 and all sorts of different things now. And then one of the kind of unsolved challenges that there's a lot of technology and innovation around is identity management. And how do you prove a individual on the internet is who they say they are, and that can be audited and validated? That's a really important area that I think we'll see innovate on in being able to kind of, to the question, Ryan, like, know that if somebody's saying they're trusted and they're saying who they are, how do you know that's a fact? And help to mitigate things like phishing attacks where people are impersonating other people. There's a lot of activity happening in that market, but fundamentally, this needs to be a brand strategy. This needs to be when you're a startup to a global enterprise, you hire your first employee, you get your first customer, get your first vendor. Trust is imperative to all of those items, and thinking about this from day one rather than waiting for it to be a problem is, I think, fundamental to how the world's most prominent players are going to manage through this.
And when we're talking about, companies that want to invest in this and they want to make cybersecurity part of their brand, let's be a little more specific. What do you guys see as the hot new cybersecurity areas that are worth investing in? Like, where should people actually be putting their time and resources? And then to kind of hop off of that question, what are some of the newer threats that I think companies need to be thinking about as well? Either one of you can go. I'm curious, like, what are some actionable things we can do here?
Natalia, I'm interested in your opinion running an actual cybersecurity program.
I was going to suggest that I was twice first, and now it's your turn to be first, but I can comment on that. I mean, one of the challenges that I see as responsible for cybersecurity is you go into a factory and ask the factories, the production manager, which assets do you have connected to the network, or go to the manager of a smart building that now all of a sudden has dishwasher machines that are connecting to the network over a Bluetooth the interface without you even noticing that. And I mean, you asked, and I bet 90% of the cases, the answer will be, well, this is the list of last month. Whether this is accurate or not, I don't know first. And second is, obviously, the devices that were connected automatically, they will not appear in the list. So one of the big challenges that I see all the time, and let's see what Kabir thinks about it. But one of the first challenges is asset management. Which assets are connected to the OT and to the IT network? Because now both networks are converging, they are getting connected. So this is the first question. Second, a little bit more complex, is what anomalies are happening in the floor, in the production floor, in the buildings. And third is, oh my goodness, all of a sudden I have devices connected to the network that were not connected before, and even worse, I mean, if they were connected to an industrial network, that industrial network never was connected to the internet, but all of a sudden with this thing called IT-OT convergence, they are suddenly connected to the internet. So then, of course, I need to manage the vulnerabilities of those devices. And how do I manage if I have, let's say, 50 different brands of 50 different devices in my factory? How do I do this? Do I go to the webpage of every single provider and supplier? What do I do this? So I know you ask us about the coolest technologies and the challenges I just described. Those and sound like, like rocket science, but it's in fact the case that those kind of solutions and processes and services that can enable a factory as quick as possible to know what is connected, number one, number two, what kind of anomalies do I have, or if I have something so that I have to stop them. Number three, how do I manage the many vulnerabilities that all of these devices have in the best way so that I know what to close first and where to stop my factory and where not. Those are questions and challenges that are these days the most important challenges to manage in the OT or in the factory space. So Kabir, now we go with you and tell us if I am right or you see something different from what I said.
No,
Yeah, what do you think?
I think you're spot on, Natalia. And I mean, I certainly have heard and read a lot about your work and Siemens's work leading in cybersecurity. And as a company that works with Siemens in many different ways, I can speak to the very high caliber investment we've seen from Siemens. And I think you're spot on. Maybe I'll just add a little bit to it. And I think, you know, in Natalia's comments about the industrial use case, you know, the industrial applications of cyber criminals, the extended enterprise. There's also ransomware and extortionware. I mean, cyber criminals are just getting more sophisticated and more successful in just kind of these quick hits with extortion or ransomware. And I think all of those are interesting technology areas. There's certainly not one technology that works for everyone. It's hard to recommend a certain technology because so many enterprises are so different in their use cases. And you really need to think about kind of program and risk surface and a little bit things first before you think about tooling. I would say one of the things that's more interesting and emerging, Ryan, is this whole concept of thinking about why an organization is being attacked. And certainly everyone's going to get kind of is at risk because of the financial reward cyber criminals can get from this. But there's also, and that's kind of out of your control, but there are things in your control now as an organization. And you're seeing an emergence of kind of this activist hacker. And because this company is, you know, making a political stance or or doesn't have the right diversity or is impacting the planet or environment, these are all things that are now increasing your attack surface. And so this emergence of what I'll call ESG, kind of the framework of thinking about what does it mean to be a good ethical company that does good for the people, that does good for humanity, that is thinking about the socioeconomic problems and thinking about the planet. The more a company can invest in ESG and be very public about the good they're doing, those are things that can reduce the activist, even activist employees, activist customers, activist hackers. And I think that kind of to the point on emerging areas and interesting technology bets, whether you're a company or an investor, this is really, really an interesting area to think about a company more holistically.
So it's interesting you touched on diversity because I would love to get your thoughts, maybe also particularly Natalia has some thoughts on this, where, you know, when you're trying to think about the cybersecurity industry as a whole, how do you make sure that you're empowering, educating people in particularly like marginalized groups or you know, marginalized areas? Like, how do we make sure that cybersecurity is something that is, you know, spreading to everybody who needs it?
Well, by educating, so we have different programs of awareness, and we have a very interesting one that is called driver license. And in this way, we, similar to a license to drive, we train the asset owners, the asset managers, and the asset administrators, and certify them. And once they are certified and know how to treat the assets, they get a license. And whenever we find out that they are not compliant and they are not treating those assets in the right way so that they are secure, then they have a risk to lose the license. And you know how it is. If you drive a car and you don't have a license, then you cannot drive the car. And if this is what you do, then for living, then that becomes difficult. So that kind of program had helped us a lot to make a proper awareness on people. Now, if we go beyond the word, if we go to the diversity, to the diversity that is needed in the perspectives to solve the complex problems of cybersecurity, then I can tell you every opinion counts, every perspective counts, whether this is coming from men or women, from vegetarians or vegans, from trans or lesbians. We need to make sure that we include everyone, every opinion. And this is exactly the strategy that we have in Siemens, to create a sense of belonging in every one of us, so that every one of us, people like me, that doesn't speak perfect English, that we feel that we belong to the company, and so that we are safe contributing with our ideas, and that are able to contribute as well with the innovation that we need, especially in cybersecurity. So probably a long answer. I hope I covered what you asked.
No, it makes sense, because I assume, you know, a trans employee would have a different cybersecurity threat map or threat area than, say, a white male employee, or an employee that speaks English as a second language might have a different threat, you know, possibility than someone who does. And in that same vein, I suppose, you know, how maybe Kabir has some thoughts on this. How do you think stakeholders, companies, people within companies can collaborate to make sure that cybersecurity is dealt with on a better level? Are there easy ways for collaboration here, or is it kind of like every man for himself?
Well, look, I don't think the job of anyone in this profession is easy right now. I mean, I think this is a real area of innovation and focus across organizations. And, you know, to the point on collaboration, Ryan, I mean, I think I love the questions, because if you would have asked even 5 years ago, you know, what does ESG and diversity and marginalized populations and cybersecurity have to do with each other? These were all very different topics and very abstract topics. But now, I mean, to Natalia's point, the, you know, what I'll call ethics, the ethics of how you approach a problem in an organization. And that's not just cybersecurity. That is like your investments in data, your investments in AI, because AI based on the data set has all sorts of algorithmic bias, and it changes over time as well. There's all sorts of new implications. And so what's starting to happen in organizations is these silos between, there's usually an ethics team, there's usually an ESG team, there's usually a sustainability team, there's usually a privacy team, and usually a security team. And the nature of today's issues is that all of those are kind of blended and merged together. So a lot of organizations are trying to consolidate those different functions, maybe not necessarily from a reporting line perspective, but from a collaboration perspective, from a stakeholder capitalism perspective, which is kind of one of the buzzwords recently. And absolutely, companies need to collaborate internally to make that available externally. And when you get into it at that level, guess what? The collaboration starts to include academic collaboration, research institutions, the general public. Even laws like the GDPR that have come out actually have, as part of the law, when you're dealing with a really sticky issue internally, it actually requires you to consult with the regulators or consult with actually the end users and what they call the data subjects that are impacted by your initiative. So there's all sorts of things that are coming from both a regulatory perspective, but also a best practices within an organization to drive that collaboration.
Let me add to that by saying that we are convinced at Siemens that you cannot deal with the challenge of cybersecurity by yourself. No one can and no one should, because if you do that by yourself, you will be very slow. And the hackers are not only intelligent, but they are quick and they are fast. So therefore, we as Siemens, together with other 16 partners of the size of Cisco, of the size of IBM, Atos, and others, Airbus, we initiated the so-called Chapter of Trust, and we have given us since 4 years 10 principles. Some of those principles include supply chain security, security by default in the products, and so on and so forth. And we cooperate and we co-create together to issue solutions for the digital world. So a very concrete example is we have agreed among us 16 partners, 16 requirements for our suppliers regarding cybersecurity. So now someone that is supplier of IBM and Siemens will get exactly the same base requirements for cybersecurity. They don't have to deal with one set of requirements from Siemens and one set of requirements for Airbus or Cisco, or you name it, Atos. Now, the next step that we are pursuing is to have a single control among us. So that if I have proof that the supplier is okay, then my partners in Charter of Trust doesn't have to do that again. That will speed up the security of the digital world, because among us we have around 1.5 million of relevant suppliers.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of cooperations that we need to have in this topic.
So in the spirit of collaboration, we have a few minutes left. So I'd like to bring you two both together for this. What's on the horizon? You know, what do you see as sort of the future of cybersecurity in the next 5-10 years? As we start to exit the pandemic and reach some kind of new normal, like, what are the threats on the horizon? What are the opportunities? What's getting you excited about the world of cybersecurity going forward?
Kabir, I will leave you now, you being first.
Well, I'll start by saying, Natalia, I loved your answer to the last question and the leadership Siemens has showed in that collaboration example you gave. So I just wanted to give you a shout out for that. I really love that. From kind of what's in the future, Ryan, look, the way I think about it is we're going through one of the biggest tectonic shifts in decision-making and buying behavior for individual consumers that there's ever been. And employees don't decide where they want to spend their time at their job based on the profit-hungry enterprise anymore. And consumers don't choose where to buy products based on the price and quality anymore. I mean, the direct-to-consumer movement is a great example. These products are way more expensive sometimes and not necessarily higher quality, but a lot of these companies believe in sustainability and giving back in the community, and there's values driven, and they're thinking about the DNA of ESG and diversity. And especially, I mean, the millennial generation started it. It was accelerated in Gen X and Gen Z. This is just becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And as we've gone through phases in the world, organizations embracing this have really gone through 3 phases. The first phase was, how do we comply? And compliance isn't a thing that as a consumer you really care about, because that's assumed, that's a baseline. And the phase we're in right now is really trust, what Natalia talks about a lot of trust, and embracing this as a critical differentiator as an organization. And what's coming on the horizon is that trust moves from being a differentiator to an organization to being existential to how human relationships work, to how society functions, to the socioeconomic gap, to the survival of the planet. And the elevation of all of these functions in an organization fundamentally changes. And this is something that every board, every CEO needs to be thinking about before anything else, because it's one of the biggest competitive advantages and existential issues of our lifetime. And I think this is a massive opportunity for the industry.
Natalia,
yes,
do you have any thoughts towards the future?
Yeah, many. Basically, what I see is 2 things. The number one thing is, doesn't matter what we companies do to protect ourselves, whatever innovation we do, and that's something that I love from Siemens. We have a big research and development team, a cybersecurity research and development team. So we are researching on post-quantum encryption and about automatic deployment of patches in the OT, and you name it. So, but doesn't matter what you do, as long as the technology develops, the attackers will do as well as steps. So you have to evolve and adapt constantly in order to survive. So this journey is not going to stop because you reach a level or 2, right? So constant evolve and adapt is key for all of us. Second thing that I see is it's not longer only about the hackers attacking you, but what we are seeing as well, and what we will see more, is regulations are a challenge now, because the governments are reacting to the many attacks that we have seen, Colonial Pipeline as an example, and they are issuing not only more regulations, but they are requesting faster compliance to those regulations. And I do understand that. I mean, no one is going to wait 3 years to be compliant to a regulation that is willing to protect the critical infrastructure for the society. So then the challenges that we companies are going to have is not only to keep ourselves secure, but as well to be upfront to these regulations and be prepared with our products to whatever is needed to be compliant. Otherwise, we will lose the license to operate for the products that we deliver to our customers. So Kabir mentioned that at the beginning. He says that he has seen that the companies that were including cybersecurity in the strategy, making sure they have security by default, making sure they have security by not only by design, but as well security by default, and other types of investments in cybersecurity. Those are the companies that have outperformed in these difficult days. And I will say they will be not only the companies that will outperform, but those are going to be the companies that will survive. So this is what I see. Adaptation and evolution is key, and we have another threat out there, which is to be compliant with the many regulations that every country in the world is issuing.
I want to thank you guys for speaking with me today. I think this was a great chat. I feel like we've learned that trust is very important. Cybersecurity has to be cooked in from the very beginning of a company's life. It's always evolving, and make sure you know what devices are connected to the internet. That seems like a very crucial thing for the future. Natalia, Kabir, thank you very much. This was great. And yeah, thank you again. This was a fun chat.